Hello and welcome to the Microbiome Medics podcast. I'm Dr. Siobhan McCormack.
And I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and we're your co-hosts.
We are both GPs and lifestyle medics with a shared passion for microbiome science, and we have spent the last 5 years deep diving into the world of the gut microbiome.
We've been analysing the evidence, appraising the studies, speaking to the experts, and writing the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians e-learning course for the BSLM Learning Academy.
We have discovered that the gut and other human microbiomes are pivotal to every aspect of your health and physiology, and the pillars of lifestyle medicine hold the key.
So in these Microbiome Medic podcasts, we'll be covering the basics, bringing you the latest research and talking to the experts on all matters microbiome.
We'll be translating the evidence and packaging it into actionable, bite-sized chunks so that you can harness the power of the microbiome to improve your own health and that of your patients.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheena Fraser, and today I'm joined with Darryl Edwards to talk about the relationship between exercise and the gut microbiome. So Darryl Edwards is a former investment banking technologist, and he's turned into a movement coach and author. He's the founder of Primal Play Method and a physical activity, health and play researcher. So after almost 2 decades of working as a technologist in investment banking, Darryl transformed his health after adopting a back-to-basics approach to well-being. As a health and movement coach, Darryl now advises people on maintaining a healthy lifestyle amidst the pandemic of chronic lifestyle disease. In September 2023, he became a fellow of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine, and I was there watching him, and it was fab. And he regularly presents as a keynote and motivational speaker at academic clinical health promotion and corporate events worldwide. Darryl's talk in April 2019, his TED Talk, Why Working Out Isn't Working Out, discusses the issues with physical inactivity and why most humans hate to exercise. And it's now been viewed over 1 million times. So pretty impressive stuff. Hi, Darryl, and welcome to the Microbiome Medics podcast.
Oh, thanks very much, Sheena. Fantastic introduction, by the way.
Well, that's your introduction, but it is a fantastic introduction, and it's really only a small snippet into the world of Darryl Edwards. Really, you do an awful lot more than that. So I just want to talk to you because I've actually followed you for quite a wee while now. So since about 2018, I think I first met you back then. At my first ever BSLM conference. And I attended it with my sister. It was a really good fun day. It was in Edinburgh. Do you remember that conference in Edinburgh?
I do, yes.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was just a 1-day conference. And I was just blown away because I'd never been to a BSLM conference before. And I was quite taken aback at how different the BSLM conferences were to other medical conferences. The atmosphere was so lively. The food was amazing. We had so much fruits and nuts and salads and, all this incredible food all throughout the day. And everybody was so energized. But one of the biggest highlights for me was actually you. And it was amazing because what you did throughout the day was you did sort of exercise bites throughout that whole conference. And they weren't normal exercise bites, not the sort that I'd come into contact with before. Instead, we were doing all these crazy things like crawling around the room and fighting each other, which was hilarious going there with my sister, because obviously, we're all very grown up now and we haven't fought each other for a long time. So that was really entertaining. And I have to say the whole conference was in hysterics and really, really enjoying it. And we just felt like kids again. So I want to just ask you, how did you get into all of this? What made you start to, go down this route of being this kind of crazy primal play exercise guru?
Yeah, I suppose it started with my childhood, which revolved around active play. So I was a kid of the 70s where you were told by your parents to get outside, and only come back when there was, time for tea, something to eat, or when the sun went down. And that enthusiasm and love and joy of movement, I lost, sort of late teens, going to university, going into the corporate world, having a very sedentary career. I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with exercise. So I knew that exercise was good for me. I believed exercise could improve the way that I looked, how I felt, but I couldn't sustain an exercise program. I bought the magazines, it didn't really help for the long haul. And the real eye-opener was in my mid-30s, having an annual health check. And my doctor said to me, you need medication. You're dealing with prediabetes. You're one sort of health mark away from full-blown type 2 diabetes. So my A1C was elevated. My fasting glucose was elevated. And I was told I had stage 2 hypertension, which I put down just to my having a stressful job. So I kind of tried to ignore it. But they were like, you need some beta blockers. You need some metformin for your blood sugars. And you've got a really poor lipid profile, cholesterol profile. So elevated triglycerides. And I was like, I don't understand any of this. What do I need to do? And the doctor said, yeah, metformin, some beta blockers, and you need something to manage your cholesterol. So statins. So I was like, wow, at my age, are you sure about this? And my doctor said, it's probably genetic. You're just unlucky. So I had a bit of reprieve when I said, hey, I am very sedentary. I'm not, eating well. Could I try exercise? I read somewhere it can help with blood pressure. My doctor was like, sure, but you're gonna be back for the meds. So I went on an exercise program, and I pretty much booked in my work diary a daily, bout of exercise at the gym. Nothing would stand in the way, and the health benefits were incredible. So my next blood check, bloods were taken, and my blood pressure was taken, and my blood pressure had come down from stage 2 to normal blood pressure. My blood sugars were coming down, so it was, went from close to type 2 to just above the normal range for prediabetes. And my lipid profile was improving. My doctor said, hey, well, are you getting meds elsewhere? What's happening? And I said, I've started exercising. I'm starting to look after myself. And I went, if I need to take the meds, I'm happy to do so, but things are looking pretty good. So for that next year, I had a quarterly checkup. Bloods were taken, and things started to normalize in a very short space of time. So within sort of 3 months, everything seemed to be back to A-OK, back to normal. My doctor said, you don't need the meds right now. And he said, I need to find out if what you're doing with exercise, are you an anomaly? Are you just a high responder to exercise? Or is this something that I'm likely to see in the research, in the literature? And I was like, what do you mean literature? So I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he said, well, I'm going to have a look at the research, and I'm going to see if I can discover why you're seeing this benefit. So I said, well, can you forward me the research? He said he wanted to do a case study with some of his other patients. So I was like, this sounds really fascinating. And that sparked my interest in the health benefits of exercise and the underlying mechanisms at play. So I decided to learn more. I became a personal trainer. I did lots of other studies in relation to exercise and exercise science. And I realized my passion was moving away from investment banking and technology and making lots of money into following my passion and wanting to help people. So exercise became medicine for me. And that was the message that I wanted to communicate. I hit a few stumbling blocks along the way because after I probably was at the peak of my fitness, I started to procrastinate around spending time in the gym. I was like, I'll go next week. I'll don't really want to be doing this. I was clock watching often. And I was questioning why I was no longer enjoying exercise after being really kind of evangelical about it, sharing how amazing it was. I just didn't enjoy the process any longer. And that's when I decided to question why I was exercising, why I wasn't receiving any joy from it, and why, with something that's so beneficial to one's health, did I not want to continue to do it? Why did I prefer being sedentary to exercising? And so I thought the last time I felt great about movement was clubbing and dancing all night. And then when I was a kid, playing. So I was like, how can I recapture that joy of movement that I had as a kid? I don't want to be going clubbing all the time to enjoy myself with, enjoy movement. But let's see if I can recreate some of those activities I played as a kid, but in more of an adult form, not patronizing myself, not dumbing down my requirement for movement, but actually almost kind of supersizing my love and joy of movement. So that's how the Primal Play method came about, that sort of genesis of the idea. And then I realized that I wanted to have an evidence base behind what I was doing. So I wanted to focus on what I call my 3 pillars of the Primal Play method, on sort of primal evolutionary biology, the environment that humans evolved in, the conditions that we evolved in that gave us these movement capabilities, this vast array of movement options, and the conditions that we evolved in order to be capable physically. And then I wanted to utilize exercise science and exercise physiology, because that tells us now with modern science what the benefits are to our physiology. So we understand the impact to our mental health, to our physical health, to our emotional health, through physical activity. And finally, I wanted to use play psychology, because that for me was what I felt was an antidote to sedentary behavior. So many people, like myself, can't latch on to a lifelong love affair with exercise. There's brief dalliances, but nothing sustainable for many. So for me, the solution was active play. So I developed this Primal Play method and, road tested by meeting as many people as possible, by sharing the good news of primal movement, of playful movement. And fortunately, there was enough of an audience for me to decide this is what I wanted to do for a living. So I ditched my previous vocation and recognized that this was truly my passion, and this is what I want to do.
Yeah, fab. And after that last conference, dancing at that conference dinner, I looked at my watch the next day, and I had done 10K after midnight. Now we only danced for about 45 minutes after midnight, but
yeah.
And the same before. And I was like, my God, 10K! I was, the equivalent of 10K clubbing. That's incredible. and when I think back to my student days, when I just used to go clubbing 3 times a week, and I wasn't doing much organized exercise. I was like that was my exercise, and I absolutely loved it. But since then, since I've stopped clubbing, I did not realize just how much I was doing in those nightclubs. So I'm with you on that one. And I wanted to say, can you explain to the listeners just the difference between primal play and sort of your traditional exercises and things? What it is that you do?
Yeah, so I help people recapture the joy of movement, help them to embrace their inner child. So it's about the experience and joy of movement, which many of us are lacking. That experience of going, oh my goodness, this just feels absolutely incredible. I just want to do this forever. So that feeling that I had as a kid playing, a game of tag, playing a chasing game or climbing trees or whatever it was in that moment where you felt, I just hope my parents don't tell me to get inside. I hope the sun doesn't come down, even though I know it will, but let's hope there's going to be a pause button on that happening, right? That feeling of like, your friends coming round, knocking your door saying, hey, are we going out to play today? Of course we are. What else are we going to do? Right. So that feeling, I wanted to model that feeling for not only kids, but for adults too. And so playful movement is really the main emphasis of the work that I do. So it's adding, using the exercise is medicine, movement is medicine as the foundation, but it's layering on top of this play. So play basically enhances many of the benefits you get from physical activity. So, the feel-good hormones, for example, like serotonin and endorphins, dopamine, all of those neurotransmitters are enhanced through play. So they're all activated through physical activity. But when you add the play state, you actually increase levels of serotonin. You get better, more responsive dopamine hits, because you're chasing that risk reward. If you're playing with a group, then you're more likely to increase the levels of endorphins. You're going to be having higher levels of oxytocin. So there's a social bonding that occurs. You're more likely to be empathetic and sympathetic, and you're more likely to have compassion for your peers. So there are all of these additional benefits that come about through active play. So I was like, great, I'm not only being physically active, but I'm enjoying myself far more. It's now sustainable for me because I'm chasing joyful experiences, but I'm also honoring the underlying benefits of physical activity and exercise, right? So I know, that one of the functions of longevity might be to improve my VO2 max, the ability for me to process oxygen. So cardiovascular exercise can do that. Me playing a game of tag can do exactly the same, but I'm more likely to be enjoying that process, right? We know resistance training has a significant benefit to our physiology. It can help to better regulate our blood sugars, for example. It can help to reduce blood pressure. So we can either find, a kind of a gruesome way of achieving that objective, right? So for many of us, exercise is a chore. Many of us have to do some sort of structured training. Many of us have to be very goal, objective based when it comes to exercise. Whereas if you follow a play state, then you're chasing the feeling in the moment. So I can have these brief movement snacks that make me feel great, that may last 30 seconds, may last 20 minutes, but it's not about the duration. It's about how good does this make me feel, right? How much am I learning about the process of movement? How much am I learning about what I can, what I can't do? How can I challenge myself in the moment? How can I share this experience? So play for me, active play I believe is the antidote to sedentary behavior. It's one solution to getting people to think differently about movement, to not have to be concerned about, do I have the right gear? Am I doing the right thing? Am I in the right environment? You can play anywhere, right? You can use and utilize anything as your playground equipment, so to speak. Wherever you are can be your gym, can be your playground. So have that shift in mindset increases the amount of movement minutes I can get in my day. I can gamify in an analog way, right? Without using technology, I can create games as I did as a kid to make moments more interesting, right? More challenging, more competitive, more collaborative, whatever the aim is. So yes, that's what I would say the difference is. A long-winded answer, but I really wanted to emphasize the focal point of play, and play in probably the most adult of forms, because we shouldn't be regressing to our childhood state. We should actually be progressing, right? Because we're adults. And the way I like to kind of an analogy of this is, if I was a cub, like a lion cub, right? A lion cub is only thinking, I can't wait to be a lion, because, or a lioness, because then I'm going to be the most powerful, explosive, dynamic, graceful, demonstration of myself as a lion, right? Whereas humans, sometimes we hark back often and go, oh, I remember when I had all this energy and I was a kid and I could move and I was so mobile and flexible and, I could just go on, move for days. And actually we should be looking forward and hopefully harnessing, our capabilities and our potential, as adults, and embracing, whatever the limitations may be. But I feel there's more, based on our experiences, there's probably more that we can achieve for a play state as an adult than as a child.
Amazing. So one of the other reasons, obviously, I've invited you onto this podcast is because obviously Shiv and I are obsessed with microbiomes. And you told me at the conference that you were also obsessed with the microbiomes and how they relate to exercise. So tell me, you've done a lot of research into this. How does your gut microbiome respond to exercise?
Yeah, so it's really fascinating. And in terms of my interest, my interest, I suppose, like many individuals looking at the gut microbiome, is through nutrition as the gateway. And that's often the context that we discuss the gut microbiome, improvements in our diet, improving our gut flora, maybe the use of supplementation and so on, maybe certain foods we should be avoiding. But I was like, well, what else can we do to improve our gut microbiome? And so two of the things that I was fascinated with were soil-based organisms, so kids that, play outside and get dirty, play in the mud. They tend to have greater microbial diversity because they're exposing themselves to many more organisms, right? And the second was for exercise. So I had no idea exercise would have any impact on the microbiome. And initially when I looked at this and I saw studies looking at individuals that had a greater diversity and greater volume of health-promoting bacteria in the gut of those who were fit, most of the studies suggested it was just to do with improvements in their diet. So, if I'm an athlete, I'm likely to, have high levels of protein, for example, and have improvements in my diet because I want to fuel my activity. I want to help myself repair and recover. So that's usually one explanation given, touted. But the great thing is now we have research which is independent of diet. So we have controls where we control for diet and for supplementation and for other behaviors that can impact the gut microbiome. And we can isolate the impact of exercise alone. So in the earliest days of the research, most of the studies were animal studies, kind of controlled animal studies. And what the research suggests is that there can be improvements in microbial diversity. There's increases in the levels of butyrate. So that's a short chain fatty acid, which is beneficial for gut flora. There's certainly increases in the beneficial microbiome, such as, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. So these like health promoting bacteria, there are higher concentrations just through physical activity. And there are other kind of butyrate producers as well that are also health promoting. But it also has a decrease in pathogenic microbes as well. So, Streptococcus is one that I can think of. But that's what the animal studies tell us, and that's pretty consistent across many of the animal studies. But the downside is, there's different animals used, there were different diets used, there were different exercise modalities used. So it's very difficult and also to see, does that translate to humans? So then the next shift was in sort of, studies involving humans, kind of cross-sectional studies, taking a snapshot. And most of those initially looked at athletes. And what they've found is that athletes have, again, increased microbial diversity, increased levels of this kind of beneficial microbiome, health promoting bacteria. They have less likely to have issues with intestinal permeability, for example, so issues with the gut, less likely to have issues such as IBD, IBS, so less likely to have issues with the gut and issues in the GI tract. So this is quite interesting because it suggests that physical activity plays a role. But again, those studies are looking at athletes who probably have many other healthy behaviors associated with their activity. One study I saw that really switched me on and switched on my interest involved rugby players. So the first study I saw had rugby players versus sedentary individuals. The reason that interested me is because rugby players, of course, don't just do cardiovascular activity, don't just do aerobic activity. And most of these studies look just at aerobic activity. So this looked at rugby players, so they do a mixture of kind of power, strength, as well as cardiovascular activities. And they found that when you compare rugby players with sedentary individuals, they have all of these benefits discussed with an improved microbiome, right? Again, the argument is they eat better. They have better diets. So the studies took a step.
They're quite alcoholic, rugby players, are they not?
I suppose, yeah, that's what. Yeah. I suppose you're right there. But I suppose if you're looking purely at the performance aspects of their athletic ability and the food intake. So if you're isolating for those, even though they're drinking alcohol, they still have a much better health state in the main than sedentary individuals. So I suppose that's what they're kind of identifying. Not saying that the rugby players are always going to be the epitome of good health. But
I'm just thinking of my father as in his student days, and his stories of playing rugby at and their drinking in those days was pretty heavy.
Pretty heavy, yeah. I mean, I think it's same as professional footballers, a generation or two ago, right, where they didn't eat well, drinking a lot. They didn't, but they just had to perform on the day. Whereas now, they were going to be, depending on your level of rugby playing, you're going to be having nutritionists, you're going to be having chefs, you're going to have diets that are, very structured and all about you performing. So I think for sure, there are probably differences in the profile of modern rugby players than even a generation ago.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make about the the importance of nutrition alongside these athletes, because Because actually I've found that with, my daughter, she's a triathlete, and she performs for Triathlon Scotland. So she's in the Triathlon Scotland squad. And she goes away on these weekends, these training weekends, or to big races. And what do they feed her? They feed her junk food. And I'm like,
Yes.
why do big organizations like this have this idea that when they're dealing with kids, they've got to feed them burgers and fish and chips and all the worst kind of foods. Because I've looked a little bit into this myself, and interestingly, there's a big difference in performance as well, depending on how you feed yourself. And again, if you increase the amount of short chain fatty acids, you have a more high fiber diet as an athlete, then you have a more protected gut, and that actually leads to not only better performance, because your short chain fatty acids really have receptors all over the body and have far-reaching effects across the body in terms of energy expenditure and mitochondrial function, and the immune system function, and all sorts of things, and how you utilize your sugars and your carbohydrates and things. But interestingly, there's a whole host of other things that they can do. They can really enhance your metabolism. And so, it is a bit crazy that even in this day and age, there's still a lot of people not fueling their athletes correctly. And I think that, the gut microbiome is really, really important to consider in this. What would you say is the best sort of fuel for an athlete?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly go back to that study, the rugby players, because to eliminate the role of diet in the microbiome, they took these rugby players and they controlled for diet. So they gave them all a consistent diet, and then they basically split the rugby players and increased the level of physical activity in half of the rugby players. And what they found in a very short space of time was that there was an increase in microbial diversity, increases in butyrate. There were improvements in the abundance of beneficial health-promoting bacteria. And they attributed this difference in improvements in their VO2 max. So VO2 max is one marker that is used in exercise science. It's used to track your ability to process oxygen as fuel. So it's really important, especially in aerobic activities. And so this was the first study that basically said, well, hey, if we control diet and look at exercise independently, as an independent intervention, we can see changes in the gut microbiome that are only attributed to physical activity. So I think that's a fascinating observation, because that then kind of springboarded into other studies, which we can discuss later. Again, to kind of teasing out physical activity alone and its benefits on the microbiome, independent of diet. In terms of your question, which I think was about, actually, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was just wondering. I mean, so exercise alone increases the diversity of the beneficial microbes in the gut, and it increases the butyrate production, which is this amazing short chain fatty acid. So even if you've got a terrible diet, or whatever your diet is, you're going to get those big improvements in your gut microbiome just with exercise alone.
Just with exercise alone.
So that's really, really interesting. And then in addition, you would, because all these things sort of sit side by side, nutrition and exercise, they're tied in together. So then you have to consider, what would be the optimum diet to enhance that further, or to not get rid of those beneficial impacts, because we know that certain foods are going to damage the microbiome. So what would you say as a coach and as somebody who, you know, deals with people who are doing all sorts of different exercises every day? What kind of things do you recommend to help their gut microbiome?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So again, I'm going to be, because my bias swings towards movement. Interestingly, in those studies, kind of short-term interventions of increases in physical activity, those individuals who went back to sedentary behavior or less active behavior, they reversed all of those changes. So it was, so they had this kind of washout period to certainly, look at physical activity in isolation. And they found that when people became more sedentary, they would reverse these changes in microbial diversity. They would lower their levels of butyrate. They would increase their levels of pathogenic bacteria, for example. So I really wanted to kind of emphasize this point around physical activity. In terms of nutrition, so certainly, with things like butyrate, short chain fatty acid, fermentation of fiber is certainly one way of achieving increases in butyrate. You will have those who follow a low carb diet, who will also point to research saying that low carb diets can also increase levels of butyrate as well. From an athletic point of view, and many of the studies in athletes are isolating protein as a macronutrient of importance for improvements in the microbiome as well. So for an athlete, protein is extremely important because it improves your ability to recover from intense exercise. So one of the things that's certainly missing from this discussion is what happens when you exercise acutely, and when that acute exercise becomes extended and you kind of do too much of a good thing. So what's interesting, when you study, you actually, because you're diverting blood and oxygen away from the gut, and because you're increasing core temperature and you have less oxygen available in the gut, you can actually increase the likelihood of gut permeability during exercise, right? So there's a lot of stress that occurs through physical activity. And this stressor, when it's happening acutely, actually leads to improvements in healing of the gut, in more motility in the gut. So actually, that's one of the reasons why exercise as an intervention, is seen to reduce the risk of certain cancers of the gut, colon cancer, stomach cancer, for example. There's a reduction in risk because of this increase in physical activity. But when this acute stressor of exercise becomes, I just want to do more, probably not eating enough, not recovering, not having enough restoration, you can actually have harmful impact from exercise. So you can increase the likelihood of gut permeability, and it be irreversible. So there's certainly issues with having carbohydrate gels and sports drinks and taking, NSAIDs, like to help with muscle soreness. Because if you're doing chronic cardio, as I call it, lots and lots of cardio, hardly any resistance training because you just want to do more volume, you're doing lots and lots of steady state, and you're in this process of increased gut permeability, right? And then you're taking NSAIDs and you're taking high carbohydrate gels, ultra processed, you're likely to cause havoc in the GI tract. So from an improvement in nutrition, you'd probably want to veer away from some of those foods. Focus on a real food diet. Certainly make sure you have adequate protein. And for your fat consumption, then you want to be focusing on the healthier fats, anti-inflammatory fats, omega-3s, as an example. So that would probably be my generic suggestion. A discussion around the importance of food from a physical activity point of view, fueling the activity, making sure there isn't too much stress, GI stress whilst you're performing the activity. So being very careful about what you're consuming on those lengthier runs. And probably for some of my clients, I would be getting them to reduce the volume, actually. Having a greater variety of activities that they undertake. So not necessarily saying cut back on your exercise, but saying maybe you can spend those hours, more intelligently, more wisely.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I think that when it comes to those sort of real endurance sports, you can push it too far, and actually you can end up with gut issues are not uncommon in these endurance athletes that are doing really long endurance races and things. So, and that's actually one of the main reasons why people drop out of these kind of races as well. Is often their guts that cause them all the problems. But these sort of athletes are not so common in our society, as you and I know. So probably what's more of interest to people is really the average person and how the average person can benefit. And what I want to talk about next is what's the difference between exercising inside, for example, gym work and stuff like this, and exercising outside in terms of your gut microbiome?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So we know that green exercise, so exercise in nature, exercise outdoors, it can be in the city, just having access to green space. It doesn't have to be in the country, right? It doesn't have to be in the hills. So just being outside adds, compounds the benefits of physical activity. So performing the same activity outdoors, if you're running on a treadmill, versus running outside, there are so many differences in the environments leading to health benefits. Everything from what you wouldn't expect. So the uneven terrain, for example, is beneficial. The wind resistance that occurs when you're outdoors is beneficial. The difference in temperature regulation is beneficial. The kind of hormetic effect that occurs of trying to adapt. All of those differences have a significant benefit to our health. But also being outside, access to vitamin D from the sun, from March to October, obviously beneficial. The reduction in blood pressure, so you reduce hypertension just being outside. That's also beneficial. There are improvements in immunoregulation, so your immune system is better able to do its job just by being outside. So there are just a number of benefits. Looking at green exercise, which is actually a term used to describe the research on exercise outdoors versus indoors. So there are many benefits of doing so, and that translates to the gut microbiome, right? So the more natural an environment in many respects, the more aligned it is to our physiology, we are obviously going to be getting benefits. There's a biophilia effect. I think it's E.O. Wilson who coined the term biophilia, humans' innate love for nature. So there's lots of research on what happens when you look at a tree, and how that can impact your physiology and how it can have an impact on your gut microbiome, because stress is also another negative impact on the gut microbiome. So being outdoors can reduce levels of stress, reduce circulating levels of cortisol. So part of the Primal Play Method is I'm a huge advocate to doing many of these activities outdoors. That's our natural environment for much of this type of movement. But I think the real, for most people, they are sedentary. Most of us are sedentary. 90% plus% of adults in the UK do not meet the physical activity guidelines when they are wearing accelerometers. So when we self-report, it's about a third of adults that meet the guidelines, but we're not meeting the guidelines for resistance training, for sure, strength training, and many of us are just not meeting the guidelines for, avoiding sedentary behavior. So most of us would benefit from moving more than we do now, moving more often than we do now, increasing the intensity of activity, not necessarily doing more for longer, but doing more intensely for shorter periods, are very beneficial when it comes to the gut microbiome, because you're reducing this window of opportunity for increased gut permeability, right? So that you have less of this hypoxia that occurs in the gut when you're exercising. You have less time where, your blood flow is being diverted away from the gut because you're being active for longer. So those aspects of movement are really important to consider, because we often, kind of overplay some of the harmful impacts of physical activity. For example, it will increase in the short term, a pro-inflammatory effect occurs when you exercise. So if you take markers like C-reactive protein immediately after intense exercise, it will be elevated. And there are many other markers of inflammation in research settings that detect increases in these levels of inflammatory markers, pro-inflammatory cytokines, for example. However, when you have consistent acute physical activity, chronically those markers actually reduce. So those who chronically exercise, and when I say chronically exercise, I mean regular bouts of exercise rather than really long bouts, actually reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines, have an systemic anti-inflammatory benefit from physical activity. There's a lowering of these health markers, a lowering of these pro-inflammatory markers that can be checked. So the main benefit of physical activity really comes from this intense shock to the system, this adaptation that occurs post-activity, and then the repair and recovery mechanism which promotes healing. So that sort of cycle that occurs needs to be just that. It needs to be a cycle. And there needs to be equal weighting to the work phase, the kind of repair and restoration phase, and the recovery, healing and health promotion phase.
Yeah. So you get this acute inflammatory response in the gut, which then seems to sort of stimulate the body's immune system to downplay inflammation elsewhere, which is really, really interesting, isn't it? That you're creating a bit of inflammation in order to knock inflammation down further. Whereas when you're sedentary, I read that you only have to be sedentary for about 45 minutes before your inflammatory markers go up. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. It's a very unhealthy state to be in, unfortunately, because you are pretty much starting to atrophy in a very short space of time. So our bodies are very efficient at deciding what is useful to as part of our metabolism, right? So muscle tissue is very expensive to maintain, right? And apart from the brain, it's a significant draw on our metabolism. So very quickly, our bodies can go, hey, you know what? I just don't need as much muscle. It's better for me to get rid of some of this. And so this process of atrophy occurs in a very short space of time. The cytokines that occur from muscle contraction. So we have lots of anti-inflammatory cytokines, which are called myokines, for muscle tissue. So muscle contraction, these kind of almost like endocrine transmitters that come from muscle tissue called myokines, they, upregulate anti-inflammatory signaling in the body, and they downregulate pro-inflammatory responses in the body. And that could be a topic in and of itself.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Interleukin 6 is one, interleukin 10 is a pro-inflammatory, but those are downregulated in response to these cytokines that come from muscle. And there are even cytokines that come from bone. So weight-bearing activity, which is one of the reasons why strength training has a significant anti-inflammatory benefit. In the short term, certainly not. The acute phase response is muscle soreness. So that's an example of an elevated pro-inflammatory state, right? That pain, discomfort. But again, you do it, you repeat those behaviors, your body adapts, it gets stronger, and then then there's a downregulation of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So yeah, that's another area of interest of mine, this muscle being identified as the largest endocrine organ.
Yeah.
And its ability to have crosstalk, not only to itself as muscle tissue, but crosstalk to bone and crosstalk to the liver, the kidneys, the heart, crosstalk to the pancreas. So one of the benefits of reductions in, say, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, for example, we know that exercise improves insulin sensitivity, but we also now know that exercise has a cytokine called irisin, which is known as the exercise hormone, only discovered in 2012. So not many people are aware of this hormone. But irisin is activated through muscle contraction, especially aerobic activity. And it has a significant impact on blood sugar regulation. It has communication from muscle to pancreas. So there's impact on kind of beta cell function and efficiency. I mean, it's literally, it's a vast subject.
Yeah, it is a vast subject.
But there are so many benefits.
I mean, Peter Attia, who's another, impressive medic over in the States, who I don't know if you listen to his podcast, The Drive. He's an impressive chap who does an awful lot of investigation into longevity and the reason for our longevity. And he basically has said, look, exercise is the most important thing in terms of improving longevity. If you're going to do one thing in this world, then exercise is it. And I would say, it's a really good thing to do. I mean, for me, I'm totally obsessed with anything exercise based, but I feel like, if you're not doing these physical activities all the time, then you're not maintaining the strength in your body. You're not maintaining your balance. You're not maintaining your physical sort of aerobic capacity to be able to do things. And of course, that's where people become so sluggish and then, don't have the ability to suddenly, jump up and play with their children or play with their grandchildren or, do these kind of things. And I feel that's really, really sad. My parents are now in their mid-70s, and a couple of weeks ago, I went on a hill walk with my parents and my family. And we went up Loch Nagar, which is in Ballater. It's beautiful, big Munro Mountain, and it's 21 kilometers. And it's a massive climb. And my parents, who are both in their mid-70s, did this climb. And what's more, the next day, who was the person that had the sore legs? Me. Not them. Because, they do a ton of hill walking and they're really fit. And I was the one that was suffering because I'm stuck in the city and I'm not doing enough hills. So, I think, if we want to maintain our fitness and improve our longevity, I think exercise is really, really important. One
Yes.
other thing I would add about going out into the hills or going out into the parks is that the amazing thing is that, you know, trees and foliage breathe. So they have microbes all around them and in the soil. So when you actually go out into nature, you inhale all of the microbes that are in the environment. And you don't get that in a gym. You probably inhale a load of other people's microbes that they're releasing,
Yes.
but you're not absorbing and inhaling all these incredible microorganisms from the natural environment. And I think that's another way that that exercise can diversify your microbiomes in your body through just that sort of being in the environment, inhaling and ingesting all these incredible microorganisms from there.
Yeah, bear crawl on the grass in your local park, bear crawl in the earth. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, soil based organisms, which doesn't get enough credit for having an impact on our gut microbiome. And we know that earlier, and I'm sure you're aware, Sheena, that the earlier we introduce, you know, contact with these microbes, the earlier we exercise. So there's really good research actually that the earlier you exercise and maintain a good exercise regimen, the more impact you have on your gut microbiome. The later in life, you have less impact. It's still beneficial, but not as much as if you load that up front. So, you know, the kids of yesteryear who would have had lots more outdoor play naturally, who weren't kind of confined to the indoors like many kids of today, would have an advantage just on that basis of having more outdoor time. So yeah, for sure. There's a significant benefit just thinking about changes of environment. And even, I'm not sure if you've seen the studies on, they started in prison populations actually, trying to, you know, improve prisoner behavior. Just having pictures in the cell of nature has a calming effect on prisoners. Has a health promoting effect on prisoners, you know, less violent incidents, less illness. I mean, it's incredible. And they confirm this with fMRI scans. So just looking at nature, having fake plants. If you can't, you know, if you don't have the green fingers to have, you know, plants indoors, even having fake plants has a beneficial effect. So, you know, there are many stepping stones to access these benefits, through having more access to nature, whether it's visually, through touching, through smelling, as you mentioned, through getting your hands dirty. You know, again, one of the benefits of gardening, right, is you're getting your hands dirty most of the time, right? You're weeding, you're getting the dirt under your nails. So fortunately, I think there was
pesticides.
Yes, of course. Yeah, don't forget the weed, the weed killer. But you know, I think certainly we know exercise has this impact on the microbiome. It has this beneficial impact on the intestinal barrier. It can help with gut immunity as well. So it certainly helps with improving immunoregulation and immunosurveillance. But there are a couple of other things that I definitely want to make sure that we discuss. And one is kind of going back to the play state again, and my advocacy for that. So there's an interesting study looking at, it's an animal study, but looking at the impact on the gut microbiome of voluntary exercise and when exercise is forced. So basically looking at the impact of you doing something that you don't really enjoy, but you're doing it because you kind of have to, right? Versus I'm just doing this because it's fun. And what they found, I'm trying to remember the outcome, but they found, you know, when mice were, or there were rats actually, would voluntarily basically go on the wheel, in the running wheel, that they would have higher levels of healthier, health promoting bacteria in the gut, greater diversity in the gut, greater gut barrier integrity, less systemic inflammation. Remarkable study, and that's one that I I hold dear to my heart because certainly if you're in this kind of like chronic stress, in a stressful state by doing the activity, and on top of that you have this additional kind of psychological stress of like, oh, I don't really want to be doing this. Why am I doing this? You're clock watching. You can't wait for it to be over. Then you're actually negating some of the health benefits of performing that physical activity. It's probably not one we're going to see replicated in humans because, of course, you can't really force people to exercise. But there are some studies looking at there's one really interesting one in older adults where they both two groups go for a walk for 30 minutes. And the second group are told, we're going to have some fun for 30 minutes. And the first group are told, we're going to exercise for 30 minutes and go for a brisk walk. And what they found was they're both walking. And what they found was the second group who were told, the first group were told, hey, let's have some fun. That group, the fun group, walked further, walked, faster. At the end of it, reported less levels of exertion used during the activity. So they didn't feel as if they did as much as they actually did. But they had, improvements in waist circumference measurements were lower. They had better blood sugar control, body fat percentage reduction, even though they basically were burning similar sort of calories, doing the same activity for the same sort of time. So there's some really good studies on just how your mindset when exercising impacts the health benefits.
Wow, that's amazing. And what about if you have a bit of a abnormal gut microbiome? Say you have like irritable bowel and you've got a lot of pro-inflammatory organisms in your gut. How does that impact on your ability to exercise? Is there any impact the other way around? So, if you've got disturbance of your gut microbiome, does that affect your exercise capacity?
Yeah, I think there are some studies. It's not an area of expertise of mine, but I know there are some studies. I mean, certainly, those with obesity have different gut flora. There's a different microbiome. Just dealing with overweight and obesity. And if you exercise, so there are studies looking at exercise in lean and those with obesity, the same type of protocol, right? So they give them both 30 minutes, the same intensity. And interestingly, there is less beneficial impact in those with obesity than those with lean mass. And the same can occur in those that have a very pro-inflammatory environment, may have an autoimmune condition, for example. So we know that the dosing has to change actually, with those individuals who are dealing with some of these conditions that can impact their desire and their ability to move more. And so interestingly, the prescription tends to be to do more actually, because you're systemically less responsive to exercise as an intervention. But by doing more, you're then increasing the health promoting benefits. That cascade effect, that downregulation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, you get more of that when you do more. So certainly, for anyone dealing with IBS, I think I wrote a blog post some time ago actually on kind of an exercise prescription for IBS. And interestingly, there's lots of evidence supporting doing lots of exercise. High intensity interval training actually is a really good protocol for people dealing with IBS. And there's a reduction in symptoms. It's like, it just seems like miraculous an impact, and certainly something that you wouldn't expect. But yes, I would certainly suggest, even though you may not feel like doing more, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile doing more. And taking it a little bit more abstract, this is an animal study, and this is another one that I found really fascinating. It's in animal studies now, they can basically produce, it's a bit cruel, I know, but they can produce rats that have no microbiome. They're basically kind of like microbiome free. And they produced rats with colitis, with no gut microbiome, right? And they transferred the microbiome from exercised rats into the rats with ulcerative colitis. And the ulcerative colitis was reversed in those rats just from taking exercised microbiota.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating when you just take the feces. So you're taking the feces, which contains all the microorganisms from that animal that has just been exercising. So they've then had those beneficial effects from the exercise on their gut microbiota, and you're just transferring the microbiota into another animal. And without the animal exercising, they're getting all those benefits because that benefit has been passed on to the gut microbiome. And that in itself is very important evidence for the impact of exercise on the gut microbiota, and then the impact of that gut microbiota change on the rest of the body, and how it's so particularly anti-inflammatory. So no, that's really, really interesting. And yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that exercise is massively beneficial. I think part of the problem that we have in society, though, is that motivation. And you must hear this all the time. I can certainly think of several patients who would really benefit from more regular exercise, but actually it's the motivation, it's the confidence to go and exercise. It's how to get them into something. And, if they've never exercised before, if they're not even, interested in any forms of exercise, how do we motivate people to get active?
Yeah, I tell you, if, I'd get the Nobel Prize if I could answer that one. But the honest, I do talk a little bit about this in my TED talk actually, and why working out isn't working out. Part of the problem is exercise is, we as humans, we want to conserve energy. That's what most animals want to achieve, is energy conservation. Just do enough to get my food, eat my food, have a bit of fun, reproduce, and go to sleep, right? There's a driver for survival, which is I want to be as efficient as possible. And so now we, in the 21st century, we have this world where we've outsourced movement to, technology, to labor-saving devices. We've got really comfortable chairs. We've got great entertainment on our phones. We don't really have to move, but we also have this, high energy, low nutrient density environment when it comes to food, right? Plus, we also have this really stressful environment that many of us live in now, right? So we have all of these like very negative drivers in our environment. And one thing that could help is to move more, is to exercise or be more physically active. But everything is telling us, why should I do that? I don't have to do it. Do you know what I mean? I have to eat, but I don't have to exercise, right? So if you don't exercise, when do you feel the harmful impact of not exercising? There's not as much of an immediacy around it, right? But if you don't eat food, if you don't drink, your body tells you, like, hey, come on, let's eat some food. And and then if you've got choice to these foods which are convenient, that's why many people will tend to go for those convenient foods, right? They're ultra processed, quick, easy to buy, easy to cook if they, or they've already been cooked, already prepared, easy to eat, not much, satiety there, want some more. So I think this is the problem, that we don't understand how difficult it is for us to overcome our biology, right? So our biology is doing what it does best when it says, hey, just sit here and wait for food to be delivered, to take it easy, right? You've had a hard day in the office. You've had a hard day at work. Like, you've done a bit of housework. Just, you can chill now. And so there's nothing, it's not about willpower, and it's certainly not about blame. Our environment is very powerful. So if you go back 100, 200 years, 500 years, 1,000 years, our environment will be telling us, hey, if you don't move, you're not going to get food, right? If you don't, if you're not active, you're not going to get to work. If you're not active, you're not going to be able to do your job, because most jobs involved quite a lot of physical labor, right? Even in I think I read in the last 2 generations, 70% of jobs were kind of physical labor intensive 2 generations ago. Now it's something like about 7%. And even those who are, you think are doing lots of physical labor, like farmers or builders, they're doing hardly any in comparison to a couple of generations ago, because we now have these machines doing most of that work. So even the most active of vocations are, relatively speaking, inactive in comparison to the recent past. So yeah, I just have lots of sympathy now. I never used to. I used to be like, yeah, just get up and move. I don't understand why you're not. but now I kind of realize, look at even furniture changes. Like, if you look at, I look at photos of like my, furniture from when I was a kid. There was no comfortable sofas or comfortable armchairs. There were no seats at bus stops. There were hardly any seats in train stations. Like, there was a lack of comfort. Whereas now you buy most people buy a chair now. They're like beds. Like, they just like wrap you in comfort and embrace you and make you want to stay there for longer. Whereas I remember the sofa that we had when I was a kid, the leather, cold, not very inviting sofa. You wouldn't stay in it for long. You'd be like, it's time to get up. But now you sit in a sofa, you're like, oh my goodness, these cushions are huge. You've got throws that are like, you know what I mean? We've now got blankets for our sofas.
Right, so we need to go back to wooden furniture.
Yeah, we need to get Spartan.
Yeah. Only put 2 chairs in the room, so somebody's always got to stand.
Yeah, it's I think I might do a documentary or something on the change in furniture. But yeah, certainly I think I coin it Big Ferner, and I think imagine in say 40 years time there's huge lawsuits to IKEA and other furniture manufacturers.
How dare
because
you make me comfortable.
yeah. You made it so easy with this really comfortable furniture, and I didn't want to move. It's your fault. So yeah, Big Ferner. Look out for that's going to be one of my next books. Yeah, The Dangers of Big Ferner.
But more of us are getting standing desks these days. I know lots of people now who have standing desks, and I have one, and I stand most of the morning. And then, when I do sit down at work, I sit on a Pilates ball and I bounce about.
Nice.
And my patient is like, why are you sitting on a ball? I'm like, well, my core has never been better.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's it's probably more obvious now because movement deficiency is so commonplace, right? That when we see somebody standing at their desk, we're like, whoa, that's kind of really radical. That's so different. But again, if you look historically, like Winston Churchill had a standing desk. Thomas Jefferson had a standing desk.
Wow.
I read that the reason why we have the term, chairman, now chairperson, right? The reason why we have the term chairman is because when the Industrial Revolution started and people started working in factories and the like, the main person would have a chair. They were so rare to have chairs, and that person would be the chairman, right? So chairs are relatively a recent introduction to our sedentary behavior. They weren't very commonplace. Even the early offices didn't have many chairs, believe it or not. So it's a relatively recent introduction, and I think you're right. Now many of us are saying, hey, you know what? There is something I can do. I can get a standing desk. I can do some movement breaks at my desk. I can get a Swiss ball, and I can walk away from my desk, and as a GP, I can every time I'm meeting a patient, I'm going to go to the waiting room and get them, and be a bit more active. And we've got all of these, we raise money for charities, and there are so many more things that we can do. But I think you have to be disciplined, and you have to have a really strong will, I think, to make that decision. And most of us aren't there. We need environmental changes, in my opinion, that make it easier for us to make those decisions. That's what I feel. It's a little bit like smoking. You go back, 30, 40 years, and all the education, the taxing of cigarettes on the packets, all the horrible images, there was still very high levels of smoking in this country. It was only when it became unacceptable through the law saying, hey, you know what? You can't smoke at work anymore. You can't smoke in the hospital. You can't smoke at work. You can't smoke in the schools. You can't smoke even in the restaurants or the pubs. When we had those laws being passed, and, now you see somebody smoking, it's like, oh, it's unusual now to see somebody smoking. Whereas when I was a kid, that it was certainly commonplace for me to see many adults smoking. So I think, we need environmental changes that can kind of shift our mindset around, hey, let's, as an organization, for example, why don't we get everyone a standing desk, or a sit to stand desk so people can decide, if they want to stand or not. And if the culture dictates that more people are keen on standing, it's probably going to encourage that to occur, But anyway, it's a bit of a pipe dream of mine of seeing the huge shifts in an environment to make it easier for us to make the right decision. Because it's not, trust me, most of the time I just want to sit and play my Xbox all day. I really do. And I love playing, I love moving, but there's something about my nice, comfortable armchair, my amazing technology, and my amazing game controller. I'm like, this is like heaven. But I have to say no, Darryl. You have to move, right? You can't just stay here all day. I think it's going to take a concerted effort to help people who feel very comfortable being sedentary.
But it's good to start these conversations, and I think what you're doing is amazing. And having seen what you do and the joy you bring to people, because I think that's the other side of your work that we probably didn't cover enough of, is just the sheer joy factor of doing the kind of play that you encourage people to do, which, as you say, must really set the endorphins going and, really improve your gut microbiome, just in terms of, giving you all those incredible happy hormones. So, that's amazing. And I get it. And I get why you're so passionate about what you do. So thank you so much for coming and talking to me today. We've covered loads, and I realize I've kept you longer than I said I would. So apologies.
Yes. It's my fault for just being so passionate about exercising the gut microbiome and all solving the world's ills.
Well, we'll have to have you back at some stage to talk to us more. But thank you so much. And that's us for today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation with Darryl, and I hope you've learned a little bit more about this. And I hope that it's inspired you to go and be more active. And like Darryl says, you don't have to do these sort of regimented exercises. You could just go and have fun somewhere, just go in and, turn it into a play, turn it into something fun and enjoyable, and think back to your childhood and the things that you enjoyed doing then, and try and incorporate more of these type of activities into your daily life. Okay, thanks again. Bye.
Thanks so much. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Microbiome Medics podcast. We really hope you enjoyed the content, and we welcome your feedback. We'd love to hear any suggestions you might have for microbiome topics that you'd like us to cover, and we also appreciate listeners' questions and will endeavour to answer them in the next podcast.
So if you want to progress this learning further, look at the Gut Microbiome for Clinicians. It's an online course on bslm.org.uk, which will take you on a much deeper dive into the gut microbiome.